Cortland Simmons with you here on this Labor Day weekend with the CS Racing Report, and we're going to do the 3-year-old rankings right now. Let's quickly get into that. At number 16 is Dream Tree for trainer Bob Baffert. She won the Prioress Stakes at Saratoga this past weekend. Very impressive. She remains undefeated. Was on the Kentucky Oaks Trail. Was taken off of it via injury. So unfortunately, she had to miss those races and the possibility of facing Monami Girl and Wonder Gadot and so forth. And she'll get that opportunity. Maybe if not in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, there's probably a seat reserved for her somewhere in Louisville at Churchill Downs, the home of the Kentucky Derby and this year's Breeders' Cup World Thoroughbred Championships. She looks like a very, very interesting prospect. Bob Baffert will probably more than likely send her along at some point. So she drops in at number 16. She'll definitely move up in the rankings once these get readjusted in the coming days. At 15 is Draft Pick. He was the winner of the Affirm, beating one of Baffert's Derby hopeful, Solomini, in that race. It was actually the day after Justified secured the Triple Crown. And then he went on, subsequently ran second to Baffert's Once on Whiskey in a very tight Los Alamitos Derby finish. And then he, along with Once on Whiskey, got smoked by another horse we're going to talk about in the West Virginia Derby. So it'd be interesting to see if he shows up at Parks for the Pennsylvania Derby, or he either runs there and or the Awesome again, where he may hook accelerate. So we'll see what happens with the Peter Urton trainee. He checks in, Draft Pick, at number 15. At number 14 is Core Beliefs, another California-based horse that we've been high on. Ran fourth in the Haskell after beating Lone Sailor in a very spirited battle in the Ohio Derby. Had run second in the Peter Pan, which is kind of the local prep for the Belmont, earlier in the spring, and had run third to the Triple Crown winner Justify and Bolt d'Oro in the Santa Anita Derby. A very nice horse. Didn't run quite as well at the Jersey Shore as a lot of people would have liked, but he's still a horse that could find a spot for himself on Breeders' Cup Day. Look for him probably also to show up in the Pennsylvania Derby. That's the likely spot that he'll show up at. And like Draft Pick, it's going to be either or, one or the other, if not both. That and the Awesome again. Core Beliefs, number 14. At number 13, he still will stay there, even though there could be a drop. Leonite, a horse out of the Steve Asmussen barn, smoked Lone Sailor pretty good in the Super Derby over the weekend at Louisiana Downs. It's a spot that may preclude Lone Sailor from running in the Pennsylvania Derby, but who knows? He may ship to New York. Tom Amos, his trainer, is a broadcaster on the New York Racing Association telecast, and did a great job at Saratoga, by the way. And he ran Lone Sailor in here. He got beat by 5 1/4 lengths. He barely got the second spot. That race has fallen a little bit from grace, being a 1 1/16 versus the 1 1/4 staple that it was when it was invented in 1980. Temperance Hill being the first horse to win that race. And then so in the subsequent years, horses like Sunday Silence and Ali Sheba and Tisnow won that race. And so it was a turf event in 2017. It's gone back to the main track. What needs to happen is that it needs to increase in distance, go back to the 1 1/8, and hopefully there'll be some added benefit purse-wise to attract some better 3-year-olds. But Lone Sailor was in there, got beat pretty convincingly, but he'll hold at number 13 until further evaluation. At the number 12 in the Dirty Dozen is McKenzie, who we have talked about at tremendous length since the spring when he got off the Triple Crown Trail, and the whole Justify story started, as I've aforementioned, when he missed the Santa Anita Derby. Justify was supposed to ship out for the Arkansas Derby, and McKenzie had an unblemished record actually going into the San Felipe. He had won the Los Alamitos Futurity in a race in which he, Solomini, and Instilled Regard, another horse you may know about, that you may know very well, they had a great battle in that big 2-year-old race after the Breeders' Cup, in which Solomini finished second, and to good magic. And Solomini was disqualified, and then subsequently, after winning the Sham Stakes, McKenzie, his number was taken down after beating Bolt d'Oro in the San Felipe. He went on the injured reserve list for the most part, and now he's being targeted, appointed to the Pennsylvania Derby, and if all goes well, we shall see if this performance will give Bob Baffert any inclination to maybe run in the Classic and or cross-enter him and look at the mile mile and so forth. And then there's the Clark handicap, which is going to probably draw a better field than in most years, simply because the Breeders' Cup is being held at Churchill, where the Clark is also contested. And it just would seem like a lot of nice horses are going to be in there. McKenzie could be one of those, whether he ends up being fortunate enough to make the Classic or not. Meantime, as we move on from McKenzie, who's still getting a lot of play in the early wagering in the Breeders' Cup bettors, in the early wagering for the Breeders' Cup Classic, Wonder Godot is at 11. She could be lower, but I'm keeping her at 11 because she's a good horse. She ran last in the Travers. The tactics that were employed in that race were questionable. She's more of a mid-package type of horse, and even though there weren't a lot of burners in that Midsummer Derby, she probably would have been way better off being, as she normally is, mid-pack placed. And that's not what happened. And over that racetrack, and against those kind of horses, you put those two things together, and you've got a perfect storm. And it did not work out well for her. And on the turn at the 3/8 pole, she basically just, called it a day, threw in the towel. And unfortunately, that's the way the trip went. She was coming out of the number 2 hole. She needed to be somewhat forwardly placed, but not in the manner that I think surprised a lot of people that she was. But she will probably be, if all goes well for Mark Casse, a horse that you're going to be looking at to be one of the ones that you're going to wager a few dollars on for the Breeders' Cup Distaff. She ran well in the Kentucky Oaks to Monami Girl. It's a 1.125 miles, which I don't think is her best distance. Again, I've said this ad nauseum. The Distaff should be 1.25 miles. And the Breeders' Cup Classic should be at 1.5 miles, or at least 11 furlongs. Maybe have one of those rare instances where, a big race is run at 11. But anyway, no one's going to change their mind based on my viewpoints and my take on all this. But Wonder Godot, she's at number 11. Cracking the top 10 is good magic. He still will probably be a finalist for the 3-year-old championship. He's had enough of a resume to possibly be one of the 3 finalists for the Eclipse Award, but he drops to number 10 just because he ran 9th in the Travers, as Jerry Bailey said, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He came out of the 9, which we don't talk about post positions in the procured way that we do with the Derby, with it being a 20-horse cavalry charge. But the 9 hole in the Travers, when you don't have a 1/4 mile to get to the first turn like you do at Churchill Downs, even in a 10-horse field can be a bit of a problem. And with a horse of his tactics, Good Magic got outrun to the first turn. It looked like he was in mid-pack on the first bend, and that was a problem right there. But as Jerry Bailey said, and I will paraphrase, he had more than 9.5 furlongs to get a trip sorted out, and with the type of horse that he is or has been, that's what was supposed to happen. Did not occur. Rest in peace, Good Magic. He, of course, is another tombstone to be erected, that has been erected in the mass grave that is Saratoga, the graveyard of favorites. And he got roasted, he got cooked. Come to find out after the race, Chad Brown said that he got sick and that his blood cell count wasn't very good. And so it doesn't surprise. Before this announcement was made, I believe Good Magic is a horse that after this, the Pennsylvania Derby was probably never on the table. The Jockey Club Gold Cup, a little more of a more reasonable, feasible possibility. But after that run, you just already, in this day and age where horses don't run as much, and he being a lighter frame horse, and the way he got cooked and toasted and marinated on that Saratoga racetrack, you just have to make some, clear and concise assessments that, number 1, he's probably not going to run the rest of this year. And number 2, that there's a good chance that, as I said before with Justify, just like with Justify, that retirement is an option. He's by Curlin. He's had enough cachet in his resume in this day and age when resumes don't have to be stacked as high as they used to be. And it just wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't race again. And he's not going to be a candidate for the Pegasus if he misses the Breeders' Cup, which is more than likely that's what's going to happen. He's probably not going to be in attendance at Churchill Downs to even spectate, much less participate in the Classic. So that's where I think Good Magic is going, unless this latest incident physically comes and goes, and he can maybe get a prep in. But the likelihood is going to be, even if things go away in the negative, that he's going to have to train up to the Classic. And I don't think he's as tailor-made to be able to run as well off of 8.5, 9 weeks, or even that kind of a layoff the way that Arrogate and American Pharaoh did for Bob Baffert. But I could be wrong. But Good Magic's number 10. Number 9 is Midnight Bisou, the filly. She did not run as well in the Alabama, and she's kind of a co-number 9 with Eskimo Kisses. I think she's on the upward swing, and I think she's a horse that, if there's there's some pace in the distaff if she can make it there, and she'll probably have a prep in between. Those two horses, particularly Eskimo Kisses, have an opportunity to have an impact. But those two horses are kind of code number 9s, and I think Eskimo Kisses probably merits being moved up a little bit. Number 8 is King Zachary, 4th in the Travers. This was a good performance. He was nowhere, it wasn't as good as the top 3, but this was redemption after running well in the Matt Win and poorly in the Indiana Derby. And we all know, as I said before, that the Breeders' Cup is going to be run back in Louisville on a track that he likes. And I think he's a horse. He has no early speed. He's going to have to work on that a little bit, but there will be pace if he's fortunate enough, whether he runs in the Pennsylvania Derby or he runs against older horses with the 5-pound weight allowance that he'll get at 1.25 miles at Belmont for the Gold Cup. So we'll see what Dale Romans does with him. At number 7 is a horse that I really like, is Axelrod. He won the Indiana Derby beating King Zachary, and Trigger Warning, another horse that I think could be slotted into the mile or the sprint. He might not be quite as ready to go the 2 turns at the added distance just yet. But Axelrod is a horse that seems to be, for Mike McCarthy, going in the direction where, he could be one of those horses that makes the Classic. He won the local prep, the Smarty Jones at Parks, so he's gotten a race over the track. Likely, there's a good chance he'll run there. Then we'll see if there are some Breeders' Cup options for him. But he looks like, if he stays in training, a really, really nice prospect, along with some of the other horses I've mentioned, Core Believes and Draft Pick and so forth. It looks like, even minus a couple characters, that the West Coast contingent will be very, very good.